Great. Okay, I'm just going to turn off my video. So, as I said, we are going to be talking about formulas and functions today. Start off with just talking fairly generally, and then we're going to be talking about adding some concepts. We'll look at some useful some useful functions that you maybe just get you started on looking at some. We'll look at the help, because the help for formulas and functions in Excel is actually really excellent. And I don't often say that about help in Microsoft products, but it really is good for functions. And then finally, we'll maybe talk about how formulas and functions aren't necessarily always the answer. So sometimes there are simpler ways to do things. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to switch into my my spreadsheet here so we can start talking about formulas and functions. Okay. One of the things I would say when you are using your formulas and your functions is don't be afraid to add lots of columns. So some people get a bit precious about their data and go, oh, I can't add a column just there. No, I can't do that. But you can. They're free, so you can add as many as you like. So you can keep adding columns. If you want to do that to build up your formulas and functions, rather than having them all in one go, you can just keep building them up and building them up. And then if you want to, you can get rid of the formulas and functions really easily, and I'll show you how to do that. And then you can delete those columns out if you want to. So just don't be afraid to keep adding them in order to do your work. Okay. Also, I would say, by general way of introduction, is there are lots of ways to do the same thing. And you should do whatever works for you. So there's always more than one way to achieve the same result. And if it works for you, then that's excellent. If you, however, write functions and formulas that go over lots and lots of lines, and they take you a long time to write, then it's maybe worth just taking a break for 5 minutes and maybe sticking what you're trying to do into the search engine of your choice, because there may be a simpler way to do it. Okay. Because there are, I think, the functions, there are 200 and something, so there's a lot of them. And you will find them on your formulas tab. Okay. So with our so I'm talking about functions and formulas. What's really the difference? Well, there isn't really that much of a difference. Really, it's interchangeable. Strictly speaking, there's a slight difference, but let's not worry about that too much. Functions are essentially pre-built formulas. Okay? So you can use either word. It's okay. All formulas and functions start with an equal sign. So if I come up to here into my formula bar and I type equals, that lets Excel know that I'm about to start typing a formula. Okay, so you always have to do that. One of the other things that you want to do when you have finished writing your formula is make sure you hit enter, or this little tick button that you'll see here, this little tick button on your formula bar. And the reason that you do that is otherwise, that kind of completes the formula. If you just go and click somewhere else, you're going to mess up your formula. And I can demonstrate that to you later if I remember. But as soon as you click on a cell reference, it thinks you're trying to refer to that cell, so it will change your formula. So just make sure that you actually hit enter or hit that tick button. Okay. And the formulas do stick to the Pemdas rules. So you may remember Pemdas or PEDMAS from school, which is the order that you do your mathematical calculations in. So you do anything in parentheses, then you do the, or what is it called when it's squared or it's cubed, that thing that begins with E, exponent, is it? Then it's multiplication, division, and then finally it's addition and subtraction. Okay, if you're not familiar with that, I'm sure that your search engine will help you to find that. Okay, with formulas as well, they can be nested. So that means that you can put formulas and functions within other functions, and I'll demonstrate one of those later when we do a nested if statement. Now, one of my top tips for you, really just for using Excel, but particularly if you're going to be using functions, is to name your ranges. Okay, so what do I mean by a named range? Well, one of the examples we're going to look at today is, if we look at my data set I've got here, I've got some bookings here, and you'll notice I've got, so these are multiple bookings. I've got things like names of courses. I've got an employee ID here. By the way, these are fake employee IDs, so I'm not identifying anybody. And it may be that somewhere else I have some data that relates to those. So here I've got employee IDs and I've got their name and their age and their sex. So you may have that kind of data somewhere else. And this is really handy. We're going to show you a Vlookup later, which is how I can get from this, I can then add in the person's name into a column here as well. But in order to do that, what I really want to do is make this data here easily accessible. So I'm going to name the range. So I'm going to select across the top here, then I'm going to use my Control-Shift-Down arrow. So Control-Shift-Down arrow just selects that table of data. You see I've got 258 rows of data there, so 257 people and a header row. I'm going to come up to my name box here, so you see it's got A1 in there. You can use your name box for all sorts of things. You can use it for moving around your spreadsheet, you can use it for going to your different named ranges, and you can use it for actually naming your range. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to give this a name. So I'm just going to call this people. And then importantly, again, I'm going to hit enter. So I now have a named range that's called people. With your named ranges, a big tip for you there is they can't have spaces in them. Okay, so don't put, if I wanted to call this people data, I would have to use people, no space data. Okay. On my formulas tab, you see here, I've got this whole thing about define names, and I can use them in formulas. If I go into my name manager, this is a different way I could do it. I could come in here and go new. I find it easier to select the data first. Okay. All right, so named ranges are really important, and hopefully you'll see that later. I've named that range, but I can also, if I wanted to, name a particular column within that range as well. So let's say that I wanted to come in here. I could just say that this column here is called age, and I hit enter, and now I've got those two different named ranges. Okay. All right. Another great concept to understand is the difference between what we call relative and absolute cell references. Okay, so if I come in here and I want to do something with my formulas, let's say that I wanted to use Concatenate or something like that to add an A onto the front of this employee ID. I just need to worry about that cell reference. Okay, so if I go in here and I go equals, and then I just hit on a cell, you see that's called C2. Okay, then if I copy that down, let's hit enter, so equals C2, and I copy that down, you'll see that as I go through, it changes C3, C4, C5, C6. If I copied this, copied it across, you know, it goes to, so it's now gone to D2 and so on. So you see the C moved to D when I went across, and the 2 moved to 3 when I went down. That's because that is a relative cell reference, not an absolute cell reference. Okay, so let's just see what happens when I do something slightly different. Okay, so let's say I come into here and I put here a $sign in front of the C. Okay, now when I go down, what happens is it still says it's the C, but the number changes. But if I go across the way, it still says is that C. So that $sign in front of the C says always look at that column. Regardless of what I do, always look at that column. Okay. Now I can also make this in here. Let's take the $sign away from the C and put the $sign in front of the 2 instead. Okay. So this time when I go down, you'll see that it stays as the 2. And when I go across, you'll see it changes to the D, but it stays as the 2. Now, why would I want to do that? What on earth is the purpose of that? And let me just show you the last one, which is to put $signs in front of both of them. That means that it will always, whatever my formula is, it will always point at that cell. Okay, so that's called an absolute cell reference. Why is that easy? Well, let's say you've got something on your formula. Let's say you've got the GST rate, something like that, or you've got an employee's a salary increase. You know, every year everyone's going to get 3% this year. You would put that 3% in a particular cell, and then if you use it in a formula, you want to use an absolute cell reference so that when you go and drag the formula down, it doesn't move It always points at that particular cell reference. And that then means as well, if you go in and you change that cell reference, it will change everywhere. So if I change that 3% to 3.5%, it will change it throughout as well. So that's absolute and relative cell references. So if your formulas are going a little bit wrong, just see, do you need dollar signs? Do you not need dollar signs? Have you got them when you shouldn't have them? And so on. Okay, so that's a bit of a biggie. Absolute and relative cell references. Okay, another thing to show you here is this FX button, which is how you insert functions. And I love this. So the FX, I can come in here and I can search for a function using my own language. It's got here the some recently used ones. You've also got, you can go and look at them for, like, I want to look at statistical ones or something like that. I can look at them all, so I can then see, yeah, all 200 and however many it is of them. Or I can type in a brief description of what you want to do and then click go. So let's say that I wanted to have a formula that was going to add up all of the ages of all of the men. Okay, so I want to know what's the total age for all of the men in this particular survey or whatever it happens to be. So I want to add up if men, and I'm going to hit go, and it's going to suggest some things for me. So it's got an if, it's got an H-lookup, it's got a dsum. If I happen to know that when I add things up it uses the word sum, I can hit sum, and then I get sum, I get sum if, I got sum ifs and sum if. So that is just giving me a little bit of information. And then it tells me, as the cell specified by a given conditional criteria, that's probably the one that I want. Okay. You then also have help. I'll come back to that later on, because as I said, the help is really good. So we'll spend a bit of time looking at that later on. Okay. Now, and I've somehow managed to, how did I manage to do whatever it was I did over there? There we go. All right. It's maybe because there we go. Excellent. Okay. So let's now start looking at, let me just check that I've got everything that I want there. Oh yes, just to let you know as well, you can use cells or ranges from other sheets. So other sheets within this workbook I could use, but I can also use cells and ranges from other workbooks. It's just a matter of getting the syntax correct. Really, the easiest thing is when you create the formulas, have them all open at the same time, and then you can just copy and paste and it will sort out the syntax for you. Okay, but essentially it's about using a exclamation point after the worksheet name, and you use square brackets around the workbook name. But as I say, it's probably easiest just to have the stuff open rather than trying to type it yourself and copy paste. Okay, so that was all the sort of concepts I wanted to talk to you about. If you've got any questions, I'm just going to pause briefly just in case there are any questions, so I can come and have a look. I'll just give you a moment if you want to type something. Okay, no questions there. So let's move on to looking at some actual functions. So we're going to get started by looking at some really useful ones. If is one of the most useful ones. So if gets used a lot, and particularly in conjunction with other formulas as well. So if is really useful. Let's say that I wanted to know of all of the people, I wanted to identify whether they were over 65, for example. Okay, so I can put my a column here called over 65 and put a little question mark in it. Okay, so if I want to know if they're over 65, I go equals to make sure it knows I'm about to type a formula. I type if, And look, I get this little bit of help here. So it's going, oh, are you doing if, you're doing if error, or are you doing an if NA? Well, I'm just going to do an if, so I can carry on typing if I know exactly what the syntax is. If I want a little bit of help, then if I double click on that, it puts it there, and then it tells me what to do. So the next thing I need to do is my logical test. So what am I trying to test for? Well, I'm trying to test if somebody's over 65. So I want to take their age, and then I want to see, is their age greater than 65? Okay. And then I'm going to do a comma, and it goes on to the next part of my function. And the next part of my function is, what do I want the value to be if true? So what do I want to appear in this particular cell if that logical test comes back as true? So in this case, I want it to say yes. I can't just type yes. I need to just put that, anything that you, any text response, you just need to put into quotation marks. So yes, quotation mark. And then I put another comma. And then as you see, we come into value if false. Okay. You may also notice that you see that C2 is blue and it's highlighting the cell. So it's also pointing out to me what's going on, where I'm pointing at cells. So I'm going to say value if false will be no. Okay. And then the final thing I need to do is I need to close the brackets. So that's another problem that people have, is particularly if they're doing nested formulas, so formulas within formulas or functions within functions, is that they get the number of brackets wrong. So however many brackets you open, you have to make sure you close them all. Okay. Don't forget, now I hit enter, and there we go. So is that person over 65? No, they're not. So then I'm going to come here and I'm just going to go, into the corner. You see where there's that little square? That's what's called my autofill handle. You'll see that my cursor turns into a skinny cross. So skinny cross, and if I just double click that, it copies that formula down all the way down to the bottom of my spreadsheet. So as we can, with quick visual test, I've got a yes there, 72, that's right, 73, that's right, and so on. Okay. So that's a basic if. Now what we might want to do is say, so if they're over 65, what we might want to say, are they between 30, what would it be, 35 and 44. Okay, so let's say that we're trying to split these up into age brackets. So are they between 35 and 44? And this is, I'm now going to use two formulas. I'm going to use an if and an and. Okay? So I want to know if they meet one criteria and another criteria as well. Okay, so again, I always start with equals, then I'm going to put if, and then I open up my brackets. So what is my logical test? My logical test would be, well, I want to do an and now, okay, because I want to do two logical tests. Yeah, so I want to now put in and I need to open my bracket. You notice this bracket is now red, so I've now got different colored brackets. It's trying its best to help me to write this formula correctly and not get my syntax wrong. So I'm going to say, is that one here, yeah, is that less than, sorry, is it greater than 34? And, so you can see my and is logical 1, logical 2. So my logical 2 would be, is this one, yeah, is it less than 45? So that's my and function, because I could keep adding on. So those ands, you can just keep adding on and going, I'm trying to look for all of these particular logical tests. But now I've closed that bracket. So again, I've got a red bracket. So I've closed that, I finished my and formula. So now I'm back at my if formula, okay? So my logical test I finished, so I do a comma, and I move on to my value of true. So if it's true, I want to say yes, comma, and then I go, what if it's false? And if it's false, I want to say no. Remember to close the bracket and hit enter. Okay, so that was a nested statement, and that was an if using an and. How about if we did an if with an if? Okay, let's say that I want to know if these people fit into, I've got some pre-arranged age brackets that I like to use. Let's say that I have noted somewhere that they are young they are middle-aged or they are old. And sorry, I just got a look from Ali. I think that's probably not politically correct for me to say use such language, but there you go. So I'm going to say that they are considered young if they are 35, and they are considered middle-aged if they're between 35 and 60. All right. So because I'm looking for 3 different criteria, so if they're over 60, I want it to return an O. If they're under 35, I want it to return a Y. And if they're in between those 2 values, I want it to return an M. So that's 3 things I'm looking at. So, but that means I need to use 2 if statements, because my first if statement, it can return something if it's true and something if it's false. But if when I say to it, well, if it's false, I want you to do another if statement, then that then gives me another true or false. So that actually gives me 3 different results. I'm going to pause and let that one sink in for a moment. And let's have a go at writing this one. This time I'm going to come up to my formula bar so you can see how it works if I'm doing it up here. So I'm going to say equals if, and I'm going to open up my brackets. So what is my logical test? So my first one is I want to see whether they are young or therefore under 35. So is their age less than 35? And then comma. So what do I want it to do if that's true? Well, if that's true, I want it to say young. Okay. Now, if that's false, if they're not young, I need it to tell me whether they are middle-aged or old. So I'm going to have another if statement. So I'm going to say if, and I'm going to open up my brackets. Okay. So my logical test this time is this going to be greater than 60? So are they over the age of 60? Okay. And then what if they are? Well, if they are, then I'm going to say they are old. And if they're not, then I'm going to call them middle-aged. I'm not sure which is more depressing. All right. Let's just go backspace and go, let's go that nice and neat. And then I need to close my bracket. Now I've just closed my red bracket, so I've closed my middle if statement. I've not yet closed my bracket for my outer if statement. So I need to close my brackets again. Remember, the number of brackets you open equals the number of brackets you have to close. I hit enter. There we go. So this person is middle-aged. And then if we copy that down, we'll find that I've got some middle-aged, some old, I've got some young, and so on. By the way, I actually did a formula to get these ages. I did what's called rand between. There you go. So that's another little tip for you. Okay. So that's some if statements. Okay. Let's say now that I want to know how many men there are in my data set. Okay, so I want to know how many men there are, how many women there are, and how many people who preferred not to say, which is what, by the way, what not applicable means. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say men, women, and prefer not to say. So now what I want to do is I want to say, well, how many of this data set are men? Okay. So for this one, again, I'm going to do an out, and I'm going to do a count if. This is one of my favorites, this count if. So what a count if does is it looks at a range and it counts up the number that meet the criteria that I set. So if I open my bracket, it says, what's the range? Okay, so in this case, I want the range to be everything in column D. Okay, and I can go comma, and what's the criteria? Well, we see there it's M, so does it equal M? So I've got 129 men. Okay, now I'm going to drag that down. Okay, so again, I've got the D, and here I've got M, but this time I don't want it to be M, I want it to be F. And then this final one, I want to come in here and I want to make that say not applicable. There you go. So that's how you do a count if. So that's a nice, easy way. I could, of course, have come in and I could filter, but that involves me doing things. And the answer isn't always there. This way, the answer is always there for me. I could also do something like a sum if. So as I was saying earlier, if I wanted to count up their ages, I could do a sum if, which is essentially doing the same kind of thing, but also then making it add up the ages. Okay. All right, so that's enough of the iffy type statements. There's a really useful one I want to show, which is concatenate. I know people absolutely love concatenate. Concatenate is where you can add something to something. Okay, so this is used quite a lot. For example, if you've got a first name and a last name and you want to make it into first name, last name, so you want to just have one name, you can do it like that. It's used quite a lot extensively in the university, I've noticed, because some of the data comes out with employee IDs without an A on it, and then other data, other systems in the university need it to have the A on it. So concatenate works really well because you can just say, hey, stick an A on the front of this number for me. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. Let's do that with our employee IDs. So I'm going to come in here and I'll just put this as a number. Okay, so equals, because remember they all start with equals. So I'm then going to type I'll start typing concatenate, but there it is, look, concatenate. And it says join several text strings into one text string. So I'm going to go concatenate. It's going, what's your text one? So in this case, it's just A. Okay, then I'm going to comma, and what's your text two? It's the employee ID. And I close my brackets, and that's that. So I've now got an A number. There you go. So I've now got A numbers for everybody. You could also do that with different things. So let's say that I wanted to know, for some reason, I wanted to have the person's name followed by their sex, followed by their age. Yeah, for some reason, I needed that piece of information. So I could go equals con, and then concatenate comes up for me. And it means I don't have to spell it. Oh, you do have to double click on that, by the way. It's a bit annoying. It'd be nice if you could single click, but you do have to double click. So my text one would be person one name. Then the thing that I want is I want it to have a space. So I actually have to put a quote mark, a space, and then close the quote mark. And then I'm going to put in a comma, and I said next I want to know their sex. So again, I have to put that space in specially, and finally I wanted to know their age. I'll close. And you might notice all this color coding that's going on. That just makes it easier, and we'll look at that more in the next session, where we'll talk about looking at formulas that other people have written. I'm going to go enter. So there you go. I've now got person one, male 41. I might also want to add in there, I might want to add some commas in there as well. Okay, and I can copy that down. Now, another thing that I might then want to do is, you'll see here, that's now a formula. Okay, by the way, if you want to see your formulas, it's Control tilde. She says, looking desperately for the tilde on this particular keyboard. Oh, there isn't one. That's rather inconvenient, isn't it? Normally it's above your tab key. I don't have one on this. Oh, there it is. Oh, it's all the way down there. Sorry, it's between the my Alt and my Control buttons in the bottom right-hand corner of my keyboard on my laptop. But there you go. So I've just hit that Control and then tilde. I have an English teacher with me. Is it tilde or tilde? It's pronounced. Sorry, we're lost. Unsure is the answer to that one. So there we go. So I just use Control, and that just shows me where my formulas are and when they're not. I might not want this to be a formula anymore, because I'm going to use this in other formulas. That's going to get confusing, or if I may just need it to be text. So the easiest way to do that is I highlight the whole row. I right click. So so I right click and drag. So I right click, drag that away, and drag it back on top. When I right click and drag, I get these options, okay, which you don't get when you left click and drag. So I get this, and what I want to do is copy here as values only. So if I click copy here as values only, I've just turned that formula into a value instead. Okay, so it's no longer a formula. I'll do that again with this. If you look in the formula bar, you'll see that's a formula. I grab the whole lot, I right click and drag it back over itself, and say copy here as values only. And now that's not a formula anymore. Okay. You don't have to drag it back on top of itself, by the way. You can drag it any way you like. I just tend to do that to get rid of the formulas. All right. One other quick thing I wanted to show you before I show you a VLOOKUP, which will be the last of the useful ones I'm going to show you to get you started, is you see here I've got, if I highlight these ages, if you notice down here, I've got then a count, I've got a sum, and I've got an average. So you don't actually have to write formulas for those. If you just quickly want to know how much something adds up to, you can just come down, look at here. This is called your status bar down at the bottom here. And I can right click. If I right click on the status bar, you'll see that I've got average count, numerical count, minimum, maximum. So I could add those in as well, and they will always appear in my status bar. If you're just doing quick analysis, that can be just as far quicker than doing formulas or functions. I use that all the time. Right. Now what we're going to do is something very, very exciting called a VLOOKUP. So I'm going to come here to my bookings tab here. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. Now what I've got here is all the bookings that we had in the last year of people. Oh, how did that happen? Okay, so here I've actually got their the people, their IDs. There we go. 28 plus 6, why on earth has that happened? You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to grab, I'm going to close this, I'm going to reopen it because I'm not quite sure what I've done there. I think I've just altered, it looks like it's turned into a time or something. So anyway, don't save that. So let me just come, whoops. Let me come into here. Excuse me for a moment. When I come into managing your research data, and I go back to my pivots, and we come to, here we go. Okay, so I still got all of this data. I haven't got those other formulas that I wrote, and I haven't got my named range. So this will just remind you how I do that. I've got my named range here. I go all the way down, and I come in, and I call that, what was it? I called it people, I think it did, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my bookings here, and you'll see that with my bookings, I've got my employee ID here. So if I just insert a column next to my employee ID, let's say that from here, oh, I know what I wanted to do as well. I'm just going to do something, just ignore me for a moment when I come in here and I sort by, I'm just going to sort by course name. There we go, excellent. So if I come in here and I go name, so what I want to do is I've got multiple of the employee IDs. So one single person might appear multiple times in this list. So if I go down to the bottom of this list, you'll see that there are several thousand rows of data in here. So several thousand rows of data, whereas here obviously I've only got those couple of hundred. So people appear multiple times. Yeah. Go at the top. And what I'm going to do is I want to put their name in there. So I've got some data somewhere. I've got that table about people, which has got their employee ID and their name in it. And I want to take the data from there, and I want to take the right name and put it next to the right employee ID. Okay. So to do that, I use a VLOOKUP. VLOOKUPs are very, very useful. Okay. I'm just going to hide that because it's making me crazy. Okay. So a VLOOKUP, I go equals VLOOKUP. You see, there it is, VLOOKUP. And it's saying to me, what's the lookup value? So what are you actually trying to look up? What I'm trying to look up is this. I want you to go off and look for this, okay? Comma. All right, it's saying to me, where do you want me to look? So what set of data do you want me to look at? And this is one of the reasons I've named my ranges. So rather than me then having to go off to another tab and highlight and then come back to this tab, and then I'll get confused because if I click anywhere else, it'll actually think I mean that cell I just clicked on by mistake and so on. It's all very difficult. So I'm going to hit my F3 button, which is my paste name. Okay. You can also get this on a formulas tab. So if I come into my formulas tab, and I say, with my defined names, I say using formula, it'll list off all of my named ranges. But F3 is the keyboard shortcut. So let's go people, like that. If you know what your name is, your range is called, you can just type it in there as well, but it just has to be exactly right. And then it's saying to me, what column index number do you want? So let's just go back quickly, have a look at this person data. So the thing that you're looking up always has to be in the first column, okay? So the thing I'm looking up is the employee ID. That has to be in the first column. And then it's saying, and which column is the thing that you want to return? So in this case, that's in column 2. I want it to look in column 1. And then when it finds the right value, I want it to return to me what it says in column 2 next to that row. Okay. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, see what happens when you click on things? It's gone off because it's gone. Remember I said that it's wherever you've clicked, it wants to put the exclamation mark. So I'll just get rid of that and I'll just say 2. So it's column number 2. Okay. Now the final part of a VLOOKUP is optional and it's a true or false. And what it's saying to you is, are you trying to look for an exact value? Or are you just looking for a match, like a close match? If you're using numbers, it's really best to look for an exact match. So something like this with an employee ID, I found if I use a VLOOKUP and I don't tell it to look for an exact match, I get false positives. So I'm going to this time go, when I put the comma in, it's saying, do you want a true and approximate match or false and exact match? So you don't even have to remember, is it true or false that I want? Just read what it says. So I want an exact match. And then I close my brackets and I hit enter. Okay. And then I can copy that down. Yep, that's right. So there you go. I've got person 2 twice just there. And I've got person, yeah, just there. Person 19, oh, they came to a few courses, and so on. So that's how you use a VLOOKUP. And I'm sorry, I sorted the courses because I thought that would mean that the people went in the right order, but that must have been how I had them sorted. Oh no, there we go. There's a person 15 in the middle of it. There you are. So you'll see now I've got all of these particular people here. Yep. So you might go, oh, that person 16. Yep, that person 16. All of those numbers are the same. So rather than me having to do this manually or any difficult way like that, I can use that VLOOKUP. Okay. So say the important thing to remember with a VLOOKUP is the thing you're looking up has to be in the first column. There's another thing about, don't worry about your column order. You can change your columns orders and all those sorts of things, and it's not going to affect anything. So for a VLOOKUP, always make sure that that column is in the thing you're trying to look up is in the first column of your table that you refer to. Okay. So that was all of the formulas I wanted to show you. I did say earlier as well we were going to go and have a look at the help. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say insert function. Now VLOOKUP is really useful. And you may think that looked really complicated, Lucy. I'm really confused. It looked kind of cool, but also I'm not quite clear why I would use it. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type, come down here and type V and VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP, it tells you here what it's about. But if I click on help on this function, I then get the Excel help. The Excel help for functions is really good. Okay. So what have I got here? Well, the VLOOKUP. It's telling me that it's one of the lookup and reference functions. There's a video here on how to look how to use it. Look at how much scrolling I'm going to have to do. So we come in here, it's got a tip, it's got the syntax, so it's explaining it to you, and it's telling you what is the lookup value, the table array, what do these things actually mean. So it's telling you a bit more detail. It's going into there, give you some examples. And then it's got, with the examples here as well, you can just copy and paste this. So you copy and paste the stuff that they give you into Excel. And then it says, now try doing these different formulas and see what results you get. Okay, so it's giving you proper examples, the little bits of data. And then at the bottom there, it's got common problems. So it's got here telling you the kind of things that can go wrong. So this is really comprehensive help. So if you are wanting help with formulas and functions, then Excel itself is a really good place to start. Okay, and then there's some related stuff here as well. Okay, all right. So I just wanted to tell you about the help function. It's excellent. Okay. Now, one of the other things I wanted to say to you is that formulas are not always the answer. Quite often they are the answer, but they aren't always the answer. I see a lot of people trying to split, say, first name and second name by writing really complicated formulas where they're looking for lengths of strings, and then they're scraping things off the end and then moving things to other places. Oh my word. You know what? Trying to split a column into two is something that lots of people do all the time. So no, you don't have to write a complicated formula. There is a function for that. So let's say that this person's name, we wanted to split into first name and second name. Let's say that everybody is called person as their first name and they all had a number for their surname. So we've got here this person name. I can just grab that and I go to, actually, did they put it onto the home page? No, they must have put it on the data page. Here we go. This thing called text to columns, right? So I'm going to say text to columns. And it's saying, is it delimited or is it fixed width? Okay. So I'm going to say it's delimited. Next, so what is the thing that delimits it? So what it means by delimited, it means how do you want to split this? In what way is this split? So in this case, I'm going to say it's split with a space, okay? Because most of that kind of data would be split with a space. And there, can you see now it's gone to person and name and it's split it to person 1, person 2, person 3, and person 4. I'm going to say next. And then it's saying, where do you want to put it? What's the destination for this? So I can say, I want to put it over here, okay? And then I can hit finish. And there you go. So that's how I could split, say, a first name and second name. Now, remember earlier I showed you concatenate. Sorry, I should pause, because normally when I show that to people, I get a bit of a reaction. So I'll just pause and let you all go, oh, at that one. I showed you earlier concatenate. There's actually now a thing called flash fill. Because Excel is pretty smart. So if I type in here, oh, I wonder if it will work when it's this generic. Let's hope it does. If I type in here person 1, and then I come down and I start typing person, oh no, it's not going to work. Person 2 is actually what I then want to do is to come into, okay. Sorry, I want to come back to my data and do a flash fill. There you go. Did you see how it just flash filled that for me? Now, let's say instead I had Jane and Emma and Lucy and Ali and Cheryl. And I had Smith and Stone and Thompson and Rotter and Adams. And now if I say I want this to be Jane Smith, now is it going to do it for me? And I come in here and I start typing, no, it's not going to do it for me today. Normally what happens is that would start to say, oh, you're trying to put these two columns together, and it would let me do that. But instead, that's okay, I'll just click flash fill and it'll do it for me that way. It's just sometimes it automatically pops up. It's really cool. So that's, as I say, complicated formulas are not always the answer. Okay. Remove duplicates is another great tool. So if you're thinking, I've got this big long list, so let's come back into here where I've got all of these persons. Let's say I wanted to know a list of all of the course names. I can just grab, this is my course column here, I can just grab it. I'm just going to come and dump it over here for now. So I could go through and I could like delete out the ones that aren't right, but instead what I'm going to do is say remove duplicates, and I'll say my data has a header and I just want you to remove the duplicates. There you go. So it found 9,547 duplicates and I've got 211 left. So that's pretty quick. So that is removing duplicates. Another thing I want to show you, so this is a real life thing that happened. Real life thing that happened. I had one of the academics get in touch with me and they had a CSV file, so a comma separated variable or comma separated values file that they got from the US. Now, when they double click on that, Excel opens it, okay? But the problem is that this was a file from the US. So the US dates are US dates, which confused Excel because the dates it was looking at were from America, but it is set locally to being Australian. So as you can see here, it got very confused. It was fine when the date was anything underneath the 12th of something, but as soon as it gets to be over the 12th, so that's the 16th of January, it's very confused because it's Americanized, so it doesn't know what that is anymore. Okay, so what you can do with that, you could write a really long, complicated formula, and you could have great fun doing that, and you could like waste quite a bit of time doing that. Or you could do something else, which is we could go to my data, that's it. And I could get some external data, and I could say, I want you to get external data from a text file. So it recognizes a CSV as a text file. By the way, while I'm mentioning CSVs, I do mention this in your managing your research data. It's really good to save your data out every now and again as a .csv file. If you have written any formulas or you've done any pivoting or anything like that, that won't convert. But what it does is it means that your data is kind of future-proofed. So if in 10 years' time you want to look at that data, if you saved it as an Excel 2013 format, it may be that Excel 2023 can't read Excel 2013, and you may have to put it through another, you may have to open it in 2013 to save it into a newer file format or something like that. Life can get complicated, but if it's a CSV file, it can read it, regardless of what version of Excel you're using. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. So I've highlighted this .csv and I'm saying import. So I now get this. This might look familiar to you. Remember we looked at this a moment ago. This is the text import wizard that before we used for the text to columns. So again, yes, it is delimited. I'm going to say next. But this time, it's not with a space, it's with a comma. See, that's immediately split it into all of those things. If I don't have that, it doesn't know what it is. As soon as I say, every time you see a comma, make a new column, and then I go next. Now, here what's going on is it's saying, this is your data preview. What kind of data format is this? What's your column data format? In general, it's normally fine, but when I get to my dates, so these are my two date fields here, I'm going to say this is a date. And it's saying, great. So I take it that's day, month, year, right? Because you're Australian and fairly sensible. And I'll go, well, I am. But this is from America, where they do month, day, year. Okay. So I'll do that with that column. I won't do it with this other column. I'll leave that as it is. But I'll say with this one, this is month, day, year. And I'll say finish. And it's saying, where do you want to put this? I'll just put it on a new worksheet in this workbook. So I'll say, okay, to that. And now can you see that it could cope with that? Okay, so now those dates have been changed around. That's when they were US dates. This is now, it understands that they were US dates, and so it's displaying them as Australian dates for me. The column that I didn't do that for, it's all still terribly confused about what's going on. So that's a real life case study of how you could write a really long formula. And in fact, I did spend a little bit of time looking into doing that and trying to figure that out. And then I went, oh, hang on, wait a minute. Why don't I use the text importer wizard and see if there's something there? And there was. So it's always worth having a poke about these other things. All right. So that brings us to the end of our formulas and functions. They're not that scary, and I hope you agree that they really aren't that scary. So we had a look at some basic concepts. Remember to name your ranges. I hope you saw why naming your ranges is really important. We looked at the FX button. We looked at that relative and absolute cell references. So that's worth bearing in mind if you are copying formulas around the place. If you're using your fill, is to think about, or if you're getting weird results, is to think about that relative and absolute cell references. Remember that was put in the dollar signs. And then we looked at some fairly useful ones just to get you started. We looked at if, we looked at COUNTIF, we looked at Concatenate, we looked at Vlookup, and then we had a little look at the help, and we've had a quick look at a few things that are not, when pivoting isn't, sorry, when pivoting, I'm confused, when it's not maybe the right thing to do using the formulas, particularly for common things. So you've got your text columns to split columns into multiple columns. You've got that fast fill that can get your concatenate kind of for you. You've got things like remove duplicates and so on. So you've got quite a lot there. In our next session, where we were going to be leveling up, we will be looking at picking up somebody else's spreadsheet. So how can you interpret what on earth they've done? And also looking at errors. So tracing where things are coming from and looking at some, if you're getting errors, how you go about sorting those out. And we may see if you want to email us at it.training@adelaide.edu.au if there's any functions or formulas you want some particular help with, then I'm sure we'll be able to include that. But now I shall pause and see if there are any questions. So not many questions at them. Oh, I've got one question. I was going to say you're either all fast asleep or I just explained everything so clearly. Okay, so can I talk about pivot tables? So yes, Vlookup is so exciting. I agree with you. Vlookup is very exciting. And can I talk a little bit about pivot tables? Actually, if you go to our YouTube channel, I uploaded a video recently. It's about 7 minutes long that talks about pivot tables. And I will be doing a webinar at some point on pivot tables as well. They are very, very exciting. One of the most exciting things about pivot tables is that they don't touch your original data. So that's the one of the things I love about them, is you can play with them to your heart's content, and they don't mess anything up. I'll just wait to see if there are any other, while I'm talking about pivot tables, if any of you have any questions around formulas or functions, then you can type them in now while I just have a look at this. All right, so I'm going to insert a pivot table for this. So I'm going to click somewhere in my table. I'm going to use my pivot button. Oh, that's how much I use it. It's on my quick access toolbar. If you don't use it that often, you'll find it on your insert, and here it is. It's the most left-hand thing. I think I've said this before. The way that these toolbars are arranged is the most popular things, the most useful things are on the left-hand side, getting less and less useful as you go across. So that's how useful pivot tables are. It's picked up my range already. It's done that because I've got no gaps in my data. Please don't put gaps in your data. It's only going to make your life hard. Okay, now, what do I want to know? Okay, let's see. Let's put in the groups. So these are all the people who did training. Let's say how many people turned up. How many people did everybody train? So I'm just going to get the employee ID. I'm going to pop it over there. Values, it's done a count. Wonderful. It's not done a sum. That's good. What else am I going to do? Let's put start date into my columns. Now that's every day. I don't want every day. That'll look too much. I want to have a look at months, say. So I'm going to click on this date. I'm going to, again, look, I use it that much that it's here. My grouping is there. It's on my data tab, so I can go group, whoops, group, and group by month. There we go. So I can now see how many people got trained in each of these by each of these groups. Let's say I'm only interested in my group, so I'm going to now put my group into the filters, and I'll just put the course name into my rows. I'm going to change this to just the training team. That's my filter, so I've now got the training team. There we go, that's what we've done. Let's say I'm not interested in the data anymore. I just drag and drop that away. Let's say I want to just sort this. Let's sort it by the largest to the smallest. So what's the most things? Oh, CRM and ePro, what a surprise. Suddenly it doesn't feel like that. And what else can I do? Let's say I want to see that as a percentage. I can come in here, I can go change the count, save value field settings. I want to show values as a percentage of the grand total there. Okay, there you go. So that's just a couple of things you can do with a pivot table. Really, it's the joy of pivot tables is you know your data, so just play with it. Look, all my original data, look, it's still there. I've not touched it, I've not hurt it. So if I make this, if this all gets crazy, like it just has done, if that all gets crazy, that's okay. I can just delete that and start again because my original data has not been touched. There you go. It's a brief introduction to pivot tables for you. They're so much fun. As I say, there's a video on it on our YouTube channel. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to get Ali to stop the recording now. If you are writing a question,